Rabbi Daniel Kaplan lived and worked in one of New York's old neighborhoods, surrounded by stone facades and dim streetlights that broke the night's darkness into small pieces. Hidden deep in the maze of streets, his synagogue was both a haven of faith and a beacon for those who sought answers, even if sometimes they didn't know what they were looking for. In the room behind the altar, Daniel sat bent over his books, playing with a prayer book that was cracked with age and the fingers of previous generations. The evening was slowly falling, and through the glass I could see only a black expanse, broken by street-light small stars, cold and far away. He felt empty. Not the kind that comes from loneliness, but a deep, almost material one, as if the world around him was a piece of paper on which no one else had written their story but himself. The faith to which he had devoted his life seemed shaky today. The questions he was used to asking aloud didn't bring any answers. The words of the prayers lost their weight, disappearing into the vastness of the night. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. It was Ellen, one of the parishioners, an elderly woman who came to the services and told stories about distant Europe, about those who did not live to see the present day. "Rabbi," she said, her voice shaking. "I feel bad. Please come." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He knew it wasn't just a disease. Sometimes the shadows of the past come into our lives without warning. "I'll be there in an hour, Ellen. Don't be afraid." He hung up and stood up. Glancing out of the window, the rabbi saw shadows playing on the walls, like living things ready to reveal their secrets. Somewhere out there, in the depths of the night, a story was beginning that would turn his world upside down, and force him to face the unknown. Rabbi Daniel did not sleep that night. A nervous anxiety, like a dark messenger, settled in his chest and did not give rest. Ellen's words still rang in his head, her voice, frightened and hoarse, like a shadow that couldn't be banished. He dressed hurriedly, buttoning up his coat and taking only the bare essentials of the Talmud, his old menorah, and a flashlight. The night was cold, and the air smelled of rain and something unfamiliar, almost electric. The street seemed different, empty but tense. The sidewalk lights flickered as if they were twitching in time with someone's breathing. Each step echoed, casting long shadows that played with reality. When Daniel entered Ellen's house, the darkness greeted him as if it were alive. The light from the desk lamp flickered and danced across the walls, making intricate patterns on the ceiling. Ellen lay in bed, pale and unconscious. But there was something strange. Her eyes were open, empty, like the windows of an abandoned house. The rabbi bent down and put his hand to her forehead, and then he felt, "It's not just a disease." Ellen's body felt like a vessel filled with someone else's essence. Snatches of words flashed through his mind, voices, echoes of ancient prayers and incantations, mixed with slurred whispers in an unfamiliar language. Suddenly, the room was filled with a chill so sharp it felt like it could cut through the skin. Daniel felt something twitch inside him, as if something invisible was pulling him out of reality. "Ellen," he whispered, "who are you?" But the only answer was a loud knock on the door and a sudden gust of wind that blew out the lamp. In the darkness, the rabbi saw something moving, not a shadow, but something blending into the night. My heart was racing, and my mind was torn between fear and the need to understand. His inner voice screamed, "Go away!" But the body, as if by the will of an invisible force, remained motionless. Suddenly, a bright light flashed before my eyes, not from Earth, but from another world. He felt himself reaching out, slipping away from himself, disappearing into the vast expanse where time and space lost their meaning. And there, in that void, like an echo from the depths of eternity, he heard a name, a single word that broke the silence. Jesus. The moment the voice said the name, Jesus, Rabbi Daniel felt his entire being torn in half. It wasn't just a word. It was a challenge to everything he believed in, everything he held sacred in his soul. In the vast expanse of light and darkness, where time flowed like water, he saw silhouettes, the ghosts of his ancestors, Torah sages, prophets and martyrs. They stood around, motionless, speechless, their eyes deep with judgment and pity. But what frightened him most was not their silence, but a small voice inside, whispering, "What are you looking for in this shadow world? Who are you afraid of losing?" Daniel knew that his faith, hardened by years of study, prayer, and service, was not ready for this test. He tried to reject the name, to sever the connection with something that seemed alien and treacherous to him. But it rang inside, like an invisible thread drawn to an unknown light. Images flashed around him, scenes from his life, memories, and visions. A mother praying on her knees, a father reading ancient scrolls, a childhood filled with the sound of singing and bells ringing. But suddenly all this was replaced by strange symbols, crosses, crowns of thorns, fire and blood. What does that name mean? What is it? He whispered to himself, and the voice echoed again in the abyss. That name is the bridge you're afraid to cross. The rabbi felt his body being pulled back to the living world, but his consciousness refused to leave this space where destinies and meanings intersect. You can't go back to your old self, the voice continued, because now you see what's hidden behind words and laws. Daniel realized that his ordeal was just beginning. He stands on the threshold between two worlds, and his soul must choose a path, stay in the shadow of old dogmas or pass through the light that can destroy everything he knew. At that moment, his heart clenched with fear, but there was a spark in the depths, a spark of understanding that true faith is not in fear, but in the courage to face the unknown. Rabbi Daniel felt the space around him begin to shrink, light and darkness intertwining in a chaotic vortex. His mind was struggling with the force that was pulling him back, into his body, into his flesh, into a world where everything seemed so familiar and yet so alien. He heard a call, the call of the body, the voice of pain and fear, the whisper of a life that couldn't be left behind forever. His chest tightened as if a fist had been clenched around his heart, and his breathing became harsh and ragged. When he opened his eyes, he saw the ceiling of Ellen's room, a pathetic patch of light in the night. There were people standing around, neighbors, random passers, by who had found him there, on the floor, by her bed. Their faces reflected alarm and incomprehension. But there was one word in the back of Daniel's mind, a name that couldn't be forgotten, couldn't be erased. Jesus. The voice seemed to whisper from the depths of darkness, reaching into the very corners of his soul, breaking down the walls he had built over the years. He could feel something burning and growing inside him, fear and awareness, faith and doubt mixed in a single vortex. The very darkness in his room seemed to come alive. In the reflection of the window, he saw not his own face, but the face of a stranger, calm, but penetrating, like a steel knife. It was the face of the one who brings light, but his light was not from the rabbi's world. Daniel tried to get up, but his legs were weak. His hands were shaking, and his voice was coming out, an exclamation, a thunder in the middle of the night that shook and burned. Jesus! There was a silence in the room, a silence that sounded like a sentence. No one knew what this name meant for the rabbi. Some prayed, some were afraid, and some simply could not believe it. But Daniel knew that he had crossed an invisible line. His journey was just beginning, and there were secrets waiting ahead that no one else would be able to tell. When Rabbi Daniel came back to life, he was on the verge of breaking up. His body was weak, but there was a fire burning inside that couldn't be extinguished, a fire of questions, doubts, and confusion. He could no longer just follow the precepts as he had before. Now there was an unknown force in his soul that was bursting out in words and looks. The congregation, his parishioners, looked at him with alarm and incomprehension. They could hear him calling out a name that was foreign to them, almost blasphemous. Jesus is a word that strikes the Holy of Holies like lightning. In the synagogue, under the arches where he had spent years reciting prayers and teaching sacred texts, questions and suspicions began. People gathered in the shadows of the pillars, whispering, afraid to express their fears openly. Someone talked about the disease, someone, about demonic influence. Daniel stood at the altar, his eyes shining with a strange light. His words were not the same as before, they were a challenge and a request for understanding at the same time. What does faith mean if it is blind? He said. If we are afraid to look beyond the usual, are we afraid to face what will destroy our world? He was listened to, but many could not accept what was in his voice. This is blasphemy, the elders whispered. This is heresy, said the young men. But Daniel felt that his journey was not accidental. It was a test that would lead him and the community to something new, an understanding that was born in the fire of doubt and pain. He began to see symbols not as dogmas, but as gates, to a world where light and darkness are inseparable, where the name he heard is not a threat, but a key. A struggle was growing inside him, between the fear of losing everything and the desire to find the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. Rabbi Daniel Kaplan stood in the dim room of the synagogue, his eyes fixed on the ancient Torah scroll that lay on the table in front of him. But the words that had been built up over thousands of years no longer seemed like a sacred law, but a mysterious cipher that had to be deciphered anew, under a new light, in a different reality. He felt an invisible wall growing between him and the community. They looked upon him as a sick man, a man who had lost his way and was now carrying dangerous knowledge with him. The elders demanded to know what had happened to the rabbi, what shadows were following him. Daniel knew that their fear was not just the fear of something new, but the fear of something that might shake the foundation of their faith. In the evenings, he increasingly took long walks through New York City at night between abandoned streets, under neon signs where destinies and secrets intersected. Here he felt the breath of the world, a mixture of ancient and modern, faith and doubt, light and darkness. Once, wandering in the shadow of an abandoned cemetery, he found a strange symbol carved into the stone, a combination of ancient Hebrew letters and a cross, intertwined like two streams of the same river. His heart began to pound harder. What is this sign? It looks like someone tried to break the boundaries, connect the unconnected. A fire of doubt and insight was burning inside him. He remembered the voice from the void, the name that had split his soul, Jesus. What if this isn't heresy, but an invitation? An invitation to understand that light and darkness are not enemies, but two faces of the same truth? The community began to test his patience and faith. During the service, one of the young disciples, David, asked directly, "Rabbi, why are you talking about Jesus now? This name is a sin for us. How can we understand you?" Daniel looked at him, tired but determined. Because the truth is not always convenient. Because we need to transcend fear to see deeper. The truth does not belong to one people or one faith, it is much broader than our words and rituals. This caused a storm. People whispered, and even those who had respected him for years began to doubt him. He felt as lonely as a traveler on a deserted road, but in this solitude he felt free for the first time. That night, he lay on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by old books and scrolls, and pondered. What does faith mean if it becomes a fetter? What does it mean to know God if you are afraid to call him what he is? He knew that the path of destruction and creation lay ahead. A path that no one will walk for him. And somewhere deep inside him, a hope was born, that by following this path, he would be able to find a world he had never experienced before. The nights grew longer, and the rabbi's inner world became more and more torn. His words, uttered in the synagogue, echoed not only in the walls of the ancient house of prayer, but also in the souls of the parishioners, many of whom were seized with fear and misunderstanding. When Daniel returned to the pulpit that night, the atmosphere was as tense as before a storm. Their faces, usually calm and reverent, were contorted with worry and anger. The elders harshly demanded an explanation. "Rabbi," one of them said, his voice tinged with suspicion, "do you dare to question the faith that you have suffered for centuries? What is this teaching that you bring to our shrines?" Daniel looked up and answered without looking away. "I do not renounce our faith. I'm only looking for light where we're used to seeing only darkness. What I saw was not destruction, but an opportunity to go through fear and gain new understanding. The name I heard is not the enemy, but the key." The room erupted in whispers, some words turning into curses, others into prayers for forgiveness. But the rabbi stood firm, like a rock in the middle of a stormy sea. That night, strange things happened on his way, inexplicable things began to happen at home. The candles themselves lit up and went out, the shadows seemed alive, and the windows reflected not the usual faces, but others, distorted by light and darkness. He began to dream, dark dreams filled with symbols and figures that spoke to him without words. In one of his dreams, a man in white stood before him, with eyes that saw deeper than death and time. The man's voice was silent, but Daniel could hear him clearly. "Don't be afraid to follow me. Faith is not in fear, but in love and understanding. When the rabbi awoke, he felt a mixture of fear and hope. He understood, his path is not one of solitude, but a struggle in which light and darkness are intertwined forever. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew he couldn't be the same anymore. His soul has disintegrated and will reassemble itself, through pain, fear, and perhaps salvation. Daniel Kaplan stood on the threshold of his synagogue, where it all began and where it might all have ended. The night was dark and thick, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. His body was tired, but his soul was burning and glowing at the same time. He remembered the moment between life and death when he heard the name that had turned his world upside down. It wasn't just a word, it was a call, a bridge between ancient laws and a new reality where faith and doubt go hand in hand. The congregation gathered around, their eyes filled with questions, fear, and expectation. But now Daniel spoke calmly, with that quiet confidence that comes only after a long struggle and inner insight. "The name I cried out in that darkness," he said, "is not the enemy. This name is a sign of love, which cannot be limited by limits. Jesus, like us, he was the son of his people, but there was a spark of light in him that lit the hearts of millions. He spoke not to destroy, but to build bridges, between people, faith, and himself." At that moment, the darkness itself seemed to recede, giving way to the soft light of dawn. The sounds of the city were softly awakening, and the rabbi felt a new faith kindle inside him, not blind or unconditional, but deep, complex, and real. He knew the journey wasn't over. This is just the beginning, a path where fear and love, faith and doubt, light and darkness will go together, opening up new horizons of the soul. And one word rang in his heart, not with horror now, but with quiet gratitude. Jesus.